the only person whose voice I'll hear is mine.
It's fucking infuriating. Yeah. It's absolutely catastrophic.
The more you do, the more you realize you can do.
Close my eyes, throw the dart, and oh wow, it hit the bullseye. A lot of the time, I think we look at sports stars. I'm watching this quarterback on Netflix at the moment, and Patrick Mahomes is just this artist. You know, he's a halfway between a warrior and a savant, and an artist and a musician and an everything rolled together, right? And the reason that we love seeing behind the scenes with stuff like that is it is somebody at the absolute zenith of their capacity, and they are putting everything that they can into making this as good as possible. And I think that I sometimes find myself getting, I certainly did before I had the podcast, I was wistful that I have the raw materials to work very hard at things, and I'd never had a pursuit that I could have applied it to. There was nothing. I remember the first time I ever heard Peterson say, work as hard as you can at one thing for a year and see what happens. And I'd never had a thing that I could work. I could work hard at business, but the line between your inputs and your outcomes is so meandering and messy that I can always excuse away good or bad performances as not being on me. And for the most part, I would take responsibility for the bad ones and not take responsibility for the good ones, because that's how I'm wired. But I never had something that was linear. Close to linear. I'm like, I put an hour in and I get an hour out, or more than an hour out. And it's direct. And then about 3 years ago, I had this conversation with Dean, my video guy. I was like, I want to turn pro. I read Stephen Pressfield, War of Art, and then I read Turning Pro. So I want to turn pro with the show. What's that mean? What would it mean if I treated this pursuit like an athlete does? So an athlete, they review game tape and they do mindset work, and they've got a sports psychologist and they look at what they eat and they look at what they drink and they go to bed on time, and they're hanging around with people that are growth minded and they're getting the right coaches and all the rest. Everything is done in order to facilitate performance in the thing that they say they care about. But everybody has the opportunity to do that. You just need to define what the thing is. I'm never going to be Patrick Mahomes, right? I no, but I managed to find my thing and then nearly kill myself in dedication toward it. There's a photo that I put up on my Instagram a little while ago, 2 weeks after I ruptured my Achilles.
I saw that.
And I'm in a boot and I've got the laptop on my lap, and we've created this arm that'll bring the mic to me because I didn't want to stop doing the podcast, because I'd made this commitment. I'm going to turn pro. And for 3 years, we haven't missed a single episode 3 times a week, 3 times a week, 3 times a week for 3 years now. And before that, it was 2 a week for a year, and before that it was 1 a week for a year, and it just keeps on ramping up. And the opportunity to commit yourself fully to something that you care about is beyond a blessing. And when you do it, the way that you feel once you know that you've worked hard is great. And we said before we started, you got this big thing coming up, which I'm super proud of you for managing to achieve, even though it hasn't happened yet. The difference between being nervous and being excited before you do something is your level of preparation in advance of it. If you step out on stage or in front of 500,000 people on a webinar, which is the craziest sentence I've ever said, if you step out on stage in front of 500,000 people and you've done absolutely everything, there's nothing to fear.
And that's why it's not about what everyone else will think, because when I'm on stage making that presentation, the only person whose voice I'll hear is mine. And I will know if I have done everything in my control to be prepared or not. And
what's the best thing that comes out? I didn't do everything that I could to prepare, and I managed to fluke my performance.
Right.
I managed to like close my eyes, throw the dart, and oh wow, it hit the bullseye. You'll even know that. There'll even be guilt. You won't even be able to fully enjoy your success.
And that's it.
Because you'll have tarnished it with your lack of input.
And what's interesting is that when you start defining your own success that way, it actually starts to feel under your own control. But the downside is you realize that you can do very few things. And then all of a sudden life feels very short, because you're like, shoot, there's like not that many things I can do before I die if I'm going to actually do my best. And what was interesting is I was talking to a CEO friend of mine. He's a public CEO. And he was like, I need to start making content, right? I'm like, dude, you're like managing $1 billion company. I was like, you're doing okay, man. But because of that type of person, he's like, I need to be doing better with my content, right? He's got a few 100,000 followers anyways. And so I was like, all right, well, how many pieces of content you're putting out a week? And he was like, well, I mean, I put out one a day. And I was like, dude, we put out 300 a week. And he didn't even respond. He just like pursed his lips and nodded. He was like, thank you for resetting my minimum standard. It's always like, thank you. And I'm sure like when you talk to Phil Heath and he talks about the volume that is required in order to gain muscle and how dialed in he is with food and all the other things. Just the amount of sheer work, like the biggest change biggest reason that I've had significantly larger returns or outcomes that have happened later on in my career, and they continue to get bigger and bigger, is because the minimum standard for how much work I know I can do on something has multiplied 100-fold. Like I look at the first presentations, I was telling Quinn this earlier, I look at the first presentations I ever gave. And I remember thinking to myself when I had this, I was like, this is a good presentation. And it's like 25 slides with like a heading and like 3 bullets on each slide and being like, man, this is good. I'm like, this is a pittance. This is like an afternoon. But in my mind, if I spent a whole day on something, that was like a lot of work. Now I like using this term like measure in hundreds, which is like measure in hundreds of hours. How many hundreds of hours have you put towards something? If you do that, I promise you the thing that you're making will get a lot better. And you'll also see how much more you're capable of, which is what I think, like my undertone of listening to what you were just saying with the podcast is like, the more you do, the more you realize you can do. And so what happens is, you're actually, even though you're going pro right now, you're like, dude, next year I'm going pro.
Yeah.
Because this is now just a minimum standard. Of course I work out 3 days a week. Of course I do 3 podcasts a week. But dude, once we have the reality TV show and we have the full crew and we have the headquarters, like, because then the path gets lit of where you're going to go because you're so singularly focused and you have no other distractions. The attention cost you're not paying that down anymore. And you're just like, how many times can I repeat this effort? And then that's when you start unlocking mastery, right? Like, I have this process for creating presentations, and before we turned on the mics, we were talking about it, but it's like, I've done a handful of presentations in my life and I've gotten decent at making them, but the process now is so refined, which is like, it is game tape. It is, I make the thing, I do the thing in my head, I do it out loud, I watch the recording, I edit the thing, I do it in my head, I do it out loud, I watch the recording, I edit the thing, and I just keep doing it until it's glass.
Dude, I listened to every podcast that I did for probably the first 2.5 years. I listened back every single time. But at the time, I didn't cringe because I thought that you crushed it. Anybody can go back and listen to episode 1 with Stuart Morton in my old office in Newcastle upon Tyne, and you'll notice every other sentence that he says, I go, It's fucking infuriating. Yeah. It's absolutely catastrophic. My accent's terrible. Everything about it is awful. And yet, at the time, I thought it was great. Here's another interesting thing I've been thinking about recently. When you don't have anything to say no to, it's easy to focus on one thing. As success begins to get you more opportunities, your ability to say no becomes increasingly important. And that's something that I'm feeling now.
Yeah.
Just more attention. We're hockey sticking quite aggressively. Yeah. And I'm not anywhere near like even middling Z-list fame. Yeah. But it's enough for people to see what they think is a penny stock and decide that they're going to try and throw their hat in the ring. Yeah. Which means that there's like 20 things I need to say no to every single week from new people that want to do a thing. Why don't we try this thing? And why don't we do that thing? And why don't we do the other thing? It was a piece of piss. 5 years ago to say, or 3 years ago in the middle of COVID to go like, I'm going to go pro and I'm just going to focus on this one thing. Because what else am I going to do? Yeah. All of my nightclubs have been shut down. I got nothing else to do with my life. Now, you said you were going to go pro? Interesting. Yeah. Let's see what happens when you have 30 other things every single week vying for your attention. Now let's see how committed you are.
This is my favorite analogy for this, which is the woman in the red dress. But, many people have seen The Matrix. If you haven't seen The Matrix, you don't need to have seen it to understand the analogy. So Neo is going through the training program, the protagonist. Morpheus is his educator, his teacher. And the education program only has one objective. And so he's walking through the city. People are going left and right. He's bumping into people going through like crowded New York. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of a black and white, palish look. It's green, black and white, but it's still black and white. And then all of a sudden, this woman in a red dress enters the frame. And you can't help but stare at this woman in the red dress, and she's a complete knockout. And Morpheus is talking to Neo, trying to teach him something. And as he's talking, he's like, Neo, were you looking at me, or you're looking at the woman in the red dress? And he says, look again. And he looks back, and it's Agent Smith holding a gun to his head. And he says, freeze, and then everything freezes in the frame. And he's like, if you're not one of us, you're one of them. And I see that as the opportunities that we have to say no to every day. Is like another woman in the red dress, and it's become a term that we use internally, right? It's like it's a woman in the red dress. And the thing is that the more successful you become, or the more able you become, the hotter the woman in the red dress is, right? Like you got a homeless girl that you're walking, past on the street. She's like all dirty, but she's got a red dress on. You're like, the thing is that homeless girl, when you were in your apartment, actually looked like
pretty hot.
Yeah, right. She's like, I'm not, I could, right? But then the better you get, the bigger the opportunities. And that's where you have not your hypothetical 10, but what about your hypothetical 100?
Yeah.
And I had a mentor say this to me right as we sold Gym Launch. He said, Alex, that now that if it's not $1 billion, it's not worth your time. And that was such a great razor for all decisions. And so people come, they're like, hey, we should do this endorsement. Hey, we should partner with this, whatever. I mean, think about it. Like, we're in the deal world. So how many deals we get? So we have 3,000 companies a month that reach out to us to do a deal. That's 100 a day currently. And we've done 13 deals in 2 years. And so like, if you think about it from an acceptance rate, it's like, and I'm not saying you shouldn't apply. By all means, go to acquisition.com and apply if you have an awesome business. But the point is that like, your no muscle isn't really a no muscle. It's just a yes muscle for the one thing that matters most.